Hello everyone and welcome to the Tradcast, the podcast that connects traditional archery enthusiasts. And today is episode number 28, and on today's show, I've got 12 things you can do to help increase daylight deer activity on your hunting property. This is going to be a really fun show. Let's get right into the action. Okay guys, welcome back to another episode of the Tradcast, the podcast that connects traditional archery enthusiasts. And today is episode number 28, and this show is for the week of July 20th, 2015. And on today's show, I'm going to give you guys some updates on some things I've been doing here in northern New York on my properties. And then I'm going to discuss later on in the podcast, I've got 12 things that you can do on your hunting properties to help increase daylight deer activity. I think everybody is really going to enjoy this podcast. Let's jump right into the show. Okay guys, and the first update that I wanted to give you guys, I know I haven't done a podcast here in a couple of weeks now, but I know in the last podcast I told you that I'd give you guys an update on the experience that I had using the Biologic Weed Reaper grass control for your food plots, and I'm happy to report that I did spray several of my food plots with the Biologic Weed Reaper grass control, and a couple of weeks later that performed very, very well. It killed pretty much all of the grasses that were in my clover plots that I sprayed. I was really happy with the results from that, and I just wanted to kind of share with you guys how I went about putting that down and the the application rate that I used. Now, I did use my 4-gallon backpack sprayer to do this spraying, and what I did is I simply added 8 ounces of the Biologic Weed Reaper per 4 gallons of water. And by using that rate, and my grasses, I would say, were roughly 6 to 10 inches tall on average, and at that application rate, I had great results at knocking out those grasses, and it did not affect my clover. I was up there on the property this past actually just a couple of days ago, and food plots all look really good. The clover is still really green, really lush, and the Biologic Weed Reaper did a great job. So I certainly can recommend that to anybody who wants to spray their clover plots or any of their perennial food plots, that being, as long as they are a broadleaf food plot and it's a perennial, you should not have any issues with the Biologic Weed Reaper affecting your food plots, and it will do a great job of eliminating that weed and grass competition. So I wanted to give you guys an update on that because I told you that I would. Now, just another quick update on the food plots is I did mow a couple of my food plots here this past weekend, and I'm now to the phase in the summer. Here we are now, July 20th, and I'm to that point in the summer where I'm starting to think about my final mowing for this year. I'm trying to time that just right, so I'm going to be having my eye on the weather forecast as we get closer to August. And I want to make the determination as to whether or not I'm going to need to mow these food plots again. Now, I do have a couple that I'm going to have to mow regardless because I didn't mow them this week, and those were mowed a couple of weeks ago now. But those didn't need to be mowed this week. But I did have a few other clover food plots that I thought needed to be mowed this week, so I mowed them this week. And so I'm either going to be done for the year mowing them, or I'm going to mow them only one more time. And I will give you guys an update on a later podcast with kind of what my thought process is later on, as to whether or not I think I'm going to need to remow these food plots. I'm still not sure if I'm going to. It's going to depend on how well they grow in the next few weeks and what the weather does. I did fertilize. I refertilized all of my clover food plots, even the ones that I didn't mow. I believe strongly in putting down a midsummer reapplication of fertilizer. And what I do is I put down roughly 50 pounds of fertilizer, 624-24 per half acre. So and if it's a smaller food plot, like a 1/15 of an acre, I'll just fill up my my little shoulder seeder. I'll just kind of fill that up about halfway, and I'll put that down on my really small food plots. But the ones that are a half acre or close to a half an acre, I usually will put down one 50-pound bag. So what I do as far as fertilizing is I like to fertilize mid-May, mid to late May. I'll get the first application of fertilizer on at the same rate, the same application rate. And then I'm also a big believer in putting down that midsummer or mid-July fertilizer application, because it's going to help give those plants, those clover plots, or any of those perennial food plots, or any food plot in general, it's going to give those another good growth boost before the colder temperatures of early fall arrive, and it'll help get your food plot in good condition going into the next year. So I'm a big believer in midsummer fertilizing. I think it's a great way to not only extend the life of your food plot, but it's also a great way to help increase deer attraction to it, because deer and other animals have a natural ability to just pick out those forages that have more fertilizer. Believe it or not, deer can actually tell which food plot or which field that they're feeding in. They will gravitate to the ones that are being fertilized most heavily. It's something that can also help increase attraction to your food plots. So I did do that also here on the food plots this week. Okay, guys, and I also have a couple of food plots that were really weedy this spring. They were just full of weeds and grasses, and they were actually food plots that I tried to establish clover in, but it just wasn't going to pan out this year. Way too many weeds and grasses. So I sprayed those food plots a couple of weeks ago now, and I was checking up on those food plots this weekend, and the Roundup that I sprayed down there a couple of weeks ago is doing a great job at just killing those food plots and all those weeds and grasses that were in there. And by the early part of August, by around August 10th, I'm going to be able to go in there and just simply broadcast some fertilizer and my fall planting on top of that, right on top of all that dead vegetation and grasses and weeds. And when we get rain over the late summer, early fall, that's going to do a great job of pushing all those seeds down into that dead grasses and weed thatch, and that should do a great job this fall of growing me a couple of good fall food plots. So I like to, if I want to plant a food plot in the fall, I like to go in the early to mid-July, spray those with Roundup, and let them have about a month to just wilt away and die and just turn to nothing. And then this way here, all you have to do is simply go in, quickly broadcast your fertilizer, and then quickly broadcast your seed right on top. And the rain that you get and just the natural settling should do a good job of getting those seeds down to bare soil and do a good job of growing, as long as you plant the right seed. So I wanted to give you guys a quick update on that as well. Okay, guys, and now I wanted to give you just a couple of updates on a couple of purchases that I recently made here in the past few weeks, and they're items that I think are going to help me substantially at my hunting this fall. And the first thing I wanted to share with you guys is I recently picked up a woodland ghillie suit from Bushrag. And the reason why I bought this is because, as you've heard in previous podcasts, if you've been following along, I did it a lot last year, and I plan on continuing to do this. I'm going to be doing a lot more hunting from the ground. And when I say that, I'm not talking about hunting out of a ground blind or anything like that. I'm talking about still hunting and just simply hunting off the ground and being extremely mobile. And I wanted to pick up a ghillie suit for a couple of reasons. And that's because, like I said, I'm going to be hunting off the ground, so I'm going to be needing to have, myself really concealed very well. And I think having a ghillie suit can really help in a couple of ways. the biggest thing that's going to do for you is it's going to help to break up your human outline. And in my opinion, when you're on the ground hunting in an exposed manner like that, you know, any additional concealment and breaking up of your human outline you can get, the better. And even if that breaking up of my human outline, if that buys me just 1 or 2 extra seconds this fall while I'm on the ground and have a deer coming in really close, that can literally be the difference between me punching a tag and taking a deer home with me or eating tag soup. So I wanted to pick up a ghillie suit. I tell you what, these Bushrag ghillie suits are very, very well made, and they look awesome, and they do a great job of breaking up your outline. Now with this ghillie suit, I put it on when I got it, and I did notice that, you know, on my bow arm, you know, on the arm that I'm holding my bow in, you know, I was going to have some issues with the ghillie threads, you know, getting in the way of my bowstring. So what I did is I picked up one of those Realtree cloth arm guards, and I put it on with my ghillie suit just the other day, and I think it's going to do a really good job of, you know, getting rid of all those ghillie suit hairs and keeping them from interfering with my bowstring. So that's something that I did do, because, you know, these ghillie suits aren't, you know, necessarily made for a bow hunter, and you know, a lot of times those strings can get in the way. But what I did is, for I think it was $8, I picked up one of those Realtree, you know, it looks like a tube sock that just doesn't have, you know, an end on it. It's just a big tube, a big cloth tube, and you just put that on over your arm, and it contains all those ghillie suit hairs. And in my early testing with it, I think it's going to do a great job of allowing me to shoot my bow while wearing this ghillie suit. So I'm really looking forward to hunting this way this year, and in future podcasts, especially once we get into the hunting season, I'm going to be letting you guys know what I think about, you know, hunting out of this ghillie suit and how that's working for me, and you know what reactions I'm getting out of deer when they see me in this thing. So I'm looking forward to that. I think it's going to be a great way to help increase my ability to get in close to deer and to make that shot when the moment of truth comes. So I just wanted to give you guys a quick update on that I will be hunting out of a ghillie suit a lot this year. And I recently picked up the Woodland ghillie suit from Bushrag. And another purchase that I recently made, it was a very costly purchase, and I thought about it a lot before I actually did it. But I ended up getting a new pair of binoculars, and I went with the Vortex Razor HD 10x42 binoculars, and all I can say is they are extremely, extremely well built. These binoculars are built like a tank, and from all of the reviews and from videos that I watched online, and, you know, different articles and review articles, you know, from what I saw online, the optical performance and the build quality of these Vortex binoculars are pretty much right up there with the most elite high-end binoculars on the market, even with the Swarovskis. Now, I've never looked through a pair of Swarovski binoculars, honestly, so I can't give you an honest comparison. I know that Swarovski makes a very, very good binocular, but these Vortex Razor line binoculars have extremely good reviews, and from everything I've seen online, a lot of people really think that the optical performance and the build quality of these Vortex rival right up there with the Swarovskis, and I think they're like a half to even a third of the price in some instances to what the Swarovskis are. So I decided to pick up these Vortex Razor HDs. I just got them a couple of days ago, and all I can tell you is they are very, very well built binoculars. They feel like a tank, and the optical performance is very, very good. I think they're going to be outstanding in low light, and I just know that now that I'm hunting more off the ground, I'm going to be even more reliant on having a high quality pair of binoculars, and I wanted to go with a brand that I could trust. And from everything I've seen online, I think these Vortex binoculars are going to work out very good for me. They, like I said, they are very expensive. They're a high-end binocular, but you know, if they even help me on one deer, if they can even help me pick out one deer and help me get in close before that deer is able to see me or hear me coming through the woods, then that purchase is going to be, well worth it to me. And I know that these binoculars are going to help me not only this year, but for several years to come. So even though they were a very expensive binocular, I thought it was a very worthwhile investment into my hunting and into the success of my hunting in future seasons. And I just wanted to give you guys a quick update on that. I'll be giving you some more updates in future podcasts, especially once we get into the hunting season, on what my thoughts and opinions are of these binoculars and how they're helping me, and any information that I can give you guys on these. I will try to do that in future podcasts. Okay, guys, and now I wanted to give you just a couple of quick updates on my shooting. And the first update that I wanted to give you guys is I've actually kind of changed up the way I'm practicing here the past few weeks. And what I've been doing the past couple of weeks is I've scaled back my practice reps. What I'm doing now, when I first started shooting traditional, and anybody who knows who's been following the podcast, I've only been shooting a traditional bow now for about 10 months, which is not a lot of time. And early on, when I first started shooting, like this past winter and even early this spring, for me, it was all about getting in the reps. And I was shooting my bow literally as much as I could and as often as I could. And I was putting in, several hundred reps a week. And on weekends and days that I had off or more time, I was even putting in up to, 100 plus reps a day. And the past couple of weeks, I have been scaling back my reps, and I think it's been helping me, focus and becoming a more accurate shot. And I just wanted to kind of explain to you guys kind of how I've been practicing here the last couple of weeks. Now, what I've been doing is I'm pretty much only shooting 5 shots now, and then I'm giving myself a break. And the thing that I've noticed that this is helping me with is it's helping me focus on each shot more. And anybody who shoots traditional knows that focus and that focusing on your target is just a huge aspect of shooting. And I noticed, in past months, after you shoot, 20, 30, 40, 50 arrows, you kind of lose a little bit of that mental focusing edge. And I was noticing that it was hindering my practice sessions because I wasn't focusing as much on every individual shot. And then I would throw an arrow, or I'd have a bad shot, and then you'd kind of get mad at yourself, and you'd have to, I got to do that over again. And it seems like the more you do that, the worse you're shooting, and the more tired you're getting, and that's affecting your shooting. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to change up things here a little bit, and I'm going to scale back the number of reps I'm doing to see how that helps me focus. And I find that it's really helping me focus now on every individual shot, because I know going into my practice session that I'm only going to be shooting 5 arrows. And when I do that, I focus so much more now on every shot. And I'm finding that it's making me become more accurate, and I'm becoming more consistent with it. So what I'm doing is I'm shooting 5 arrows, and then I'm giving myself anywhere from an hour to, a couple, 2, 3, 4, 5 hours in between practice sessions. And then I'll come back for 5 more arrows. And then maybe later on that night, maybe 5 hours later, I'll come back and shoot 5 more arrows. So I'm scaling back my number of reps because now I'm getting much more comfortable with my own shooting style and with my own release style. So I don't have to focus so much on getting the reps in and building that muscle memory. Now for me now, it's becoming more about fine-tuning my shots and really focusing on every shot and trying to simulate that, that first shot of the day kind of deal. Because, like I said before in different podcasts, I'm going to be, my only area of concern is traditional bow hunting. I'm not going to be partaking in very many 3D shoots. It's something I might do with some buddies, for a quick day of fun or something like that. But 3D archery isn't something I really do a whole lot of. For me, it's all about bow hunting and practicing for my bow hunting. And for me, I think this is going to help I already know that it already is helping me, and it's going to continue to help me, I think, as the days, weeks, and months go on. So I just wanted to give you guys a quick update on this change in practicing that I've done here the last couple of weeks. Okay guys, and another quick update I wanted to give you on the shooting front is pretty much effective July 1st. I have not shot anything but my Simmons Landshark broadheads since the 1st of July, and I don't intend on shooting anything but my broadheads from now until after hunting season. It's really doing a big number on my Glendale, target, and I'm tearing up the insert on that. But I just think that shooting your broadheads is so crucial, and I just know for myself, I want to build up as much practice reps and as much time with the broadheads as possible. I don't want to bounce back and forth from broadheads to field points back and forth this close to season. I mean, season's going to be here before you know it, and I want to practice with my broadheads, and I want to make sure that when I'm shooting at an animal this fall, that I am 110% completely confident in my broadhead flight and with how that's working for me. And the biggest thing that I've noticed, the biggest adjustment that I've had to make when I'm going from field points to my broadheads isn't necessarily so much in the flight characteristics, because my broadheads and my field tips are exactly the same grains. So it's not so much from that aspect, even though I have noticed there is a slight difference in arrow flight. Not a lot, but there is a slight difference, and I want to have my mind completely glued and synced with the flight of those broadheads. But the biggest thing I have found is that your sight picture, the visual that you get peripherally of that broadhead in your sight picture when you're looking down range, it's a big difference than with the field points. So for me, the biggest thing is just getting accustomed and just getting used to that sight picture of having that big broadhead at the end of your arrow. And I just find that I've shot the last several hundred shots, well, since July 1st, and I've pretty much shot every day. I'm shooting exclusively with my broadheads, and I am finding myself becoming more in tune with them. And it's just now when I'm looking down range and I see that big broadhead at the end of that shaft, it's just my mind is just becoming accustomed to seeing it, and now it's like it's normal for me. And I think if I was to go back to a field point at this point, that would kind of look different, and maybe I'd have a hard time adjusting to that. So the biggest reason why I'm talking about this is I just think shooting with your broadheads is, just unbelievably important, and it's something that I am going to be doing pretty much now through hunting season, even though I'm probably going to tear up a couple, 2, 3, $70, Glendale full rut inserts. In my opinion, that expense is worth, for me, the expense is worth, the practice reps and getting that familiarity with the broadheads and just making sure that I'm honed in for this fall and the most accurate bow hunter that I can possibly be. So I wanted to give you guys a couple of, just a quick update on that also. Okay guys, and I just got a couple of quick trail cam updates for you guys. The first update, I just want to kind of let you guys know what I've been seeing on the properties here the last couple of weeks. I still have those 2.5-year-old bucks that have been on the property pretty regularly. And of course now we're into we're getting into late July, so the racks are becoming very apparent what they're going to be, and they're going to be, what it looks like to me is one's going to be a pretty good size 4-pointer and just a big crotch horn, and the other one is going to be at least a 6-pointer, and he's got pretty good brow tines on him, and he may get to an 8. I'm going to have to see exactly how his rack fully develops here as we get into August. But those 2 bucks are still on the property. I'm probably going to take, if I can get an opportunity at that 6-pointer, I'm probably going to take it this year with the longbow, because I came into the season saying that a good 2.5-year-old buck is going to be my target animal, because I just simply don't have any real mature bucks on the property right now. So that good 2.5-year-old buck is going to be my target buck on the property. And I do still have several big mature does up there as well. I'm going to be looking to fill a doe tag or two up there this fall also. Got a couple of real good candidates. Got a couple of does that don't appear to have any fawns with them this year. And they're just really big, old, mature-looking does. So, and actually, they're the biggest deer I've got on the property as far as body size. These are just some really big does. So I'll be looking for a few of them also. And I've also got a pretty good-sized bear who's been up on the property. And I think I've got 2 different bears. One is a pretty good-sized bear. So I'll be looking, I'll be looking for him. He's coming in. He seems to be coming into my clover food plots. In fact, not this past weekend, but the weekend before, I was up there doing some food plot work, and I noticed a bunch of bear hair in one of my clover lanes. And, sure enough, I pulled the cards there, went back home, and right in that area, I had a couple of pictures of a pretty good-sized bear in there. So I'll be looking for him also here, during the early portion of the season, and maybe I can get him coming into one of those clover plots. That would be a great thing to get my first black bear kill with the longbow as well. So just wanted to give you guys a couple of quick updates on what I'm seeing on the trail cameras. I will be putting together another what's on my trail cameras video. That'll be number 7. You can look for that in a couple of days here on the YouTube channel. And the last kind of trail cam update I wanted to give you guys is this weekend coming up, I'm going to try something different, something I've never tried before. And I'm going to go into some state land property. What I've been doing here, I did it a little bit today, and I'm going to do it over the course of the next few days, is I'm going to go on to Google Maps, and I'm going to research and look at a whole bunch of aerials and try to find a couple of really remote-looking areas, big swamp areas. And I'm going to go in there this weekend. I'm going to try to find 1 or 2 places this week, and then go in next weekend with a couple trail cameras. And I'm going to hang a couple of trail cameras on either the transition line where the woods meet these swamps, or I'm going to look for a point or a terrain feature that kind of juts out into the swamp, and see if I can't get a mature buck or 2 on camera that way. And I'm going to go in there this week, put those cameras out, and I'll go back in there probably mid-September, and hopefully they won't be stolen, because this is going to be state property. So I'm going to look for some very remote areas where I don't think anybody's going to go into, and I'm going to see if I can't locate a shooter buck or 2 that way. And if I get a buck or 2 on camera, then I know that's going to be pretty decent hunting areas, and I'll go in there later on this season, and I'll still hunt in those areas. And I'm probably going to do that regardless anyways, whether I get trail cam pictures or not. I'm still going to be doing a whole bunch of that kind of hunting this year. So, but that's something I'm going to try as far as my trail cameras, seeing if I can't locate a mature buck that way. I'll let you guys know what happens, obviously, when I get those cameras, when I go in, check those cameras here in probably another, month and a half or so. But just wanted to give you guys a quick update that I'm going to be doing that, which I think is going to be which I think in theory is going to be a good way to try to locate a shooter buck or 2, because, these big mature bucks, usually look for those real dense swamp areas to bed in and to hold up in. So I'm going to see if I can't locate 1 or 2 that way, and I'll let you guys know how that works for me. Okay, guys, but now I'm going to jump into the main topic for this podcast, and that is I've got 12 ways that I think will help you increase daylight deer activity on your property. And the first thing I want to share with you guys is the number 1 thing that's helped me increase, activity in general, but especially daytime activity on my 2 properties, has been putting in food plots. And, I've got several food plots now on my property, as you know, if you've been following along. But even if you only have room to put in 1 little food plot, I would recommend getting that food plot on your property, even if it's just, a little half-acre, kind of a natural clearing that you could take maybe a chainsaw and a brush hog into, or maybe a big weed trimmer. And even if you can just carve out a little half-acre there and put in some clover, I really think that is probably the number 1 easiest way to increase general deer activity on your property, but also daylight activity. is by simply putting in a food source of some kind. So, like I mentioned, it could be something as simple as just going into a small little clearing and putting in, a quarter or half acre of clover. In my opinion, it's the number one way of increasing activity. It's, my little food plots have, without question, significantly increased overall activity that I'm seeing on my properties, and especially daylight activity. Now, another thing that I think is very important, especially if you have a small property, which I have, my properties are 45 acres and 90 acres, which are, still relatively small properties, in the grand scheme of thing. One thing that both of my properties have going for them is they have extremely dense cover. Now, my one property, my 90-acre property, is just kind of that way naturally because most of it is just a big cedar swamp, and it's just thick in there naturally. But my other property, my 45-acre property, is more of a big wood setting. It's more of a hardwood setting. But actually, before I even bought the property, a couple of years before I bought it, the previous landowner had the property logged, or very heavily select cut. And what's happened now over the last 4 or 5 years is the berry briars and the brambles and the briars and the thickets are just coming in incredibly thick on that property, and it's really giving my deer a lot of places to hide and feel safe while traveling on the property. And this is something that I'm going to continue to maintain throughout the years, because here I am, 4 years later now after that cut, and I do have, some mature trees, starting to kind of reshade, some areas back out. But what I'm going to be doing, especially this coming winter and into the next year or two, is I'm going to be going in there with my chainsaw, and I'm going to be doing a lot of hinge cutting, and pretty much just hinge cutting any mature trees that are growing and that are, inhibiting the sun from hitting that forest floor and helping, regenerate all those berries and briars and just all that thick underbrush. That's been, in my opinion, a very significant attribute that my property has that I don't think my neighboring properties have as much of, because my property was logged and much of the neighboring property has not been. So it just seems like the combination of the food plots and that real dense cover, which was created from the select cut, has really helped increase not only overall activity, but especially daylight activity, because my deer feel very comfortable on the property. Okay, guys, and the third thing I want to cover here, and I think that this is very important for your food plots, and that's I love to have, very thick edge habitat or edge cover on my food plots. And pretty much what I mean by this is when you're standing in your food plot and you're looking back out into the woods, if you can see, 40, 50, 60 yards or farther into the woods from your food plot, that's not a whole lot of edge cover or edge habitat. I like it when I'm in my food plot and I'm looking back into the woods, I like it when I can't even see 5 yards into the woods. And I just think that helps those deer feel very secure and very, calm when they're in them food plots, because they know that a predator or something in the woods, can't just be looking through the woods, into that food plot from 40, 50, 60 yards away and see them out there in an exposed position. So in all of my food plots, I have them all in areas that are very, very thick, and I've helped, by making the edges of all those food plots very, very thick, and where you can't see outside the food plot very far. And I'll even go as far as to, twist, branches, down in different positions, and, cut logs and, hang logs kind of in between tree limbs. Just any way to decrease the amount of visibility into that food plot from the woods. That's one thing that I think has really helped increase the daylight usage of my food plots, is the fact that once deer are out in there, animals and other predators in the woods can't see them out in there from any distance at all. And I just think it helps those deer feel very secure when you're in your food plots feeding, especially during the daytime. Okay, guys, and of course that's going to play right into the very next element, which is, in general, I like to have my food plots within the thickest areas of my property. And what I typically do is I'll go into my property, into those real thick understory areas, and I go in there with my heavy-duty weed trimmer, and I just remove all of the weeds. And even if I can only get, an 1/8 of an acre, or even a 1/15 of an acre, I've got food plots on my property that are literally as small as about a 1/15 of an acre. And these food plots get incredible daylight activity. And if you've been following along with my Facebook page, I post several photos weekly of, several deer that, come into these food plots at all hours of the day. I mean, 10 o'clock in the morning, noon, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you name it. I mean, there's not an hour in the day that I don't have, typically some deer activity in my food plots. And I think it's because, they're just in such thick areas in general. The area is so thick, all that under canopy and undergrowth is so dense that the deer just feel super comfortable out there foraging, kind of almost in their bedding area. And on more than one occasion, on multiple occasions now, even this summer alone, when I'm going in to either mow one of the food plots or to, spread fertilizer or whatever, when I'm going in there midday, on more than one occasion, I have bumped deer that were bedded literally 10 yards off of those food plots. And in some cases, I've even seen deer, bedded in the food plots. And I'm constantly seeing beds right in the food plots themselves. So that tells you right there that those deer are super, super comfortable being in those food plots during daylight hours because they're bedding in them. I mean, how can a deer feel any more comfortable than bedding and feeding in the same location? So, food plot size, food plots don't have to be big. In fact, I prefer small food plots, honestly. And I just feel that if you keep them small and you keep them in very thick cover, you can have tremendous daylight utilization of your food plots. Okay, guys, so just to back that up again, what I just said is, again, I like to keep my food plots very, very small. I mean, the largest food plot that I've got on my properties is about a 1/2 of an acre in size, which is not that big. But the vast majority of my food plots are anywhere from, like I said, a 1/15 of an acre to about, a 1/4 of an acre. That's my average food plot size. And what I'm seeing is that it seems like the smaller the food plot is, the more daylight utilization that food plot's going to get. Because again, it all comes back to security. And deer are going to feed, especially during those daytime hours, they're going to feed typically where they're feeling secure. And that's especially true in, heavily hunted states like New York. I mean, I live in an area, here where I live, we have a 2-month-long rifle season. So, in my opinion, you can't get any more hunting pressure than that. Hunting gun pressure is the ultimate when it comes to hunting pressure. And we have as much gun hunting pressure as anybody. And probably more than anybody. And I think if you can get deer to, if I can get deer here in northern New York to utilize my food plots during daylight hours, by keeping those food plots extremely small and in dense cover, I feel that's something that somebody could accomplish pretty much anywhere else in the whole country. So keeping them food plots small is certainly something that's helped me, and I'm really finding that the deer, especially when it comes to daytime usage and hunting hour usage, those deer really love to feed in them small food plots. Okay, guys, and now I'm going to talk a little bit about my #1 food plot design, which also plays right in and will help you in a hunting scenario. And that is, I love to, go in and make what I call forage lanes, which pretty much can consist of, just going in on an old ATV trail or a bulldozer trail or any kind of a, logging road or wood road that meanders through the woods. As I go in there, and of course you want to remove all the weeds and grasses with Roundup, and then I go in there and I establish clover plots in these areas. And the last several years, that has been without question my favorite food plot design, because it not only, in my opinion, they're the most utilized during daylight hours, but one of the things that I've kind of realized the last couple of years from hunting these food plots is the fact that when you're hunting a forage lane, and I'm just going to give you an example of the one that I have on my property. I have a forage lane which pretty much is just the bulldozer trail that was made when I hired the I hired a guy a couple of years ago to go in there with. One day he came up with a bulldozer and he created 3 of my food plots that are about a half of an acre in size, because he, had to pull up all the stumps, and I had him kind of make a road system connecting all of these food plots together with his dozer. And of course he made, about a 10-yard wide dozer trail throughout the whole property. So what I did is I went in there afterwards and I established clover on this dozer trail. And that's become probably my most utilized food plot, is simply the dozer trail system. And what I've noticed the last couple of years from hunting this dozer trail is that when deer come out there to feed, because it's a lane and it actually kind of, encourages the deer to travel while they're feeding, what I've noticed happens is the deer will come out and they'll feed in this clover trail, and they kind of keep moving as they're feeding. So it's a great way to reduce the likelihood that you're going to get picked off while hunting in this forage lane, because the deer aren't coming in to, a little circle-shaped food plot and feeding there for a half an hour or for whatever, period of time. And they're actually coming into one location and they're feeding while traveling to a different area of the lane or to a different area of the property. And what it does is it allows the deer to feed past my stand locations, my strategically placed stand locations, and as the deer travel past, I'm getting shot opportunities. And the deer aren't in those areas long enough to really detect me, either visually or by scent. So it's reducing the likelihood that I get picked off, either by scent or visually, by the deer while they're in there feeding. And it's helping increase, activity, general travel activity by the deer as they're kind of traveling and eating at the same time. So these little forage lanes that I call them, I call them forage lanes. In my opinion, these are an exceptional food plot design. They're great for encouraging daytime activity as long as you've got a lot of edge cover, and they're in a pretty, dense area to begin with. But they're also very good from a hunting standpoint because they'll give you strategic shot opportunities, but it also reduces the likelihood that deer are going to linger in one spot for any length of time, especially as it gets closer to dark and you have to, climb down out of your stand. You're a lot less likely to spook deer in these forage lanes because odds are they've come out and they've, fed past your location, and either you passed them or you took the shot or whatever, but you're a lot less likely to spook the deer. And I find that these become a lot more huntable, especially more times throughout the season. So I wanted to kind of share with you guys kind of my thoughts on these forage lanes and why, in my opinion, they're also very good from a hunting standpoint. Okay guys, and now I'm going to talk a little bit about trail cameras and how I use these on my properties, and how I feel that, I help, or I don't discourage daylight deer activity by how I'm using my trail cameras. And the first thing that I want to mention is that when I check my trail cameras, I only check those midday, regardless of the situation or time of year. So I always check my trail cameras pretty much between the hours of 11 a.m. through about 2 p.m. That's pretty much the only time that I check my trail cameras, except for when I'm hunting and I'm, already in hunting near a camera. If I'm in the, if I'm on my property hunting a morning hunt and I have to walk past a camera to get back to the truck, then yeah, I'm probably going to pull the card while I'm in there. But minus that scenario, I never change my cards or go in to do a card pull, during those early morning or even mid-morning hours, or, in the last couple of hours before dark. The last thing I want to do on my property is, bump a deer that's out in a food plot feeding or traveling through my property. The last thing I want to do is bump them, going in to check a trail camera. So I always check my trail cameras midday, and, I find that you're a lot less likely to spook deer during those midday hours, especially during the off season, spring through late summer. You're much less likely to spook deer if you're going in there checking your trail cameras midday. Without question, that's the best time to check your trail cameras, and to limit the impact that you're having on those deer. Now, another thing about checking trail camera, or about trail cameras, is, and it's something that I've kind of noticed the last couple of years, is that I've noticed that my trail cameras are spooking less and less deer each year, and I think it plays very heavily, that it has very heavily to do with the fact that I never move my trail cameras around. I have a pretty good grip now on how the deer travel through and use my property, and I've pretty much had all of my trail cameras in place now the last couple, 2-3 years, and they never come off the tree. I run my trail cameras 365 days a year. All I ever do is change the batteries, and even if the batteries do die, and I don't run that camera for a couple of weeks or for a month, I leave that camera right on the tree. It never leaves that spot. And what I've found the last couple of years is that the deer just get so used to seeing this camera in that spot that they must just think it's part of their natural environment. Because I get dozens of pictures now with deer, feeding literally with their heads, a foot or 2 feet away from my camera. And you can just tell by what's going on in the image that these deer aren't paying any attention whatsoever to that trail camera, because they've seen it there day in and day out, week and week on end, and month after month. That camera just never moves. It's always there, and they just think it becomes part of their environment, like it's part of the tree or whatever. But I find that if you leave your cameras in place for the long haul and don't keep moving them around, you'll really reduce the amount of spooking deer that'll happen by using a trail camera. And I mean, anybody listening, if you've, and I've been guilty of it myself before, and it's how I noticed it, is because, you'll move a trail camera from one spot to the next, and, in the first few weeks of that camera being there, you can just tell in the pictures that the deer are seeing this camera. And even if it's broad daylight, there's no flash or no IR lights going off, you can just tell that the deer see this camera and they know something ain't right. And, I just find that that's a lot more likely if you're continually bouncing cameras around all over the place. So once you get a good grip on where deer are traveling on your property, I like to leave them cameras in place and just let them be there, all the time. Your deer get used to seeing them, and you'll get to the point where even now at night, I find that, I'm having very few instances where I think my trail cameras are spooking deer. And I think a big contributing factor to that is the fact that my cameras have been pretty much in place the last several years. Okay, guys, and just another thing I have to mention on trail camera placement stuff, and another thing that I do on my properties, especially on my own personal properties, I would probably do this maybe on state land. In fact, I'm going to do this when I go into these swamp areas. But on my own property, I like to keep my trail cameras in relatively easy areas to access. Now, what I mean by that is I keep my trail cameras either on one of these forage lanes or on a trail that I've mowed through the deep woods, or in a food plot. But I keep them in areas where I can relatively easily get in there, not make too much noise, and not spook bedded deer. What I like to refrain from doing is putting my cameras back in near bedding areas or in thick woods where I have to, trample in there and make all kinds of noise and make all kinds of racket and risk spooking deer. So I pretty much never enter the wooded portions of my property except during hunting season. For a couple of weeks out of the year, closer to the rut, that's when I'm kind of on all hands on deck and into my best spots, my real tight wooded areas. But during the off season or just during, general trail camera usage, I like to keep my cameras in, pretty much easier to access areas, because I don't want to spook these deer midday when deer might be bedded somewhere close by. So I think that's another important aspect of using trail cameras, especially if they're on your own private property, where you're going to be making, several trips throughout the year to your property. You want to limit the amount of times you're spooking deer, and one good way to do that is to keep your trail cameras in relatively easy areas to access. Okay, guys, and another thing that I've had good luck with as far as trail cameras is by using the little HME trail camera holder arms that allow you to position and angle your camera in pretty much any position. I've found good success at mounting my trail cameras a little bit higher, like head height, and then angling them down to capture the images of the deer or whatever animals come through. I think that that's another way that you can help to reduce the impact that your trail cameras are having on the deer. Okay guys, I've got 3 more things that you can do to help, in my opinion, to help increase deer activity, especially daylight activity on your property. And the first thing I want to cover is, and I've done it now on a few different places on my properties, is I'll go into these very thick natural travel corridors. And I'm going to use one example. I'll use is it's a spot up on my property. And if you follow along with my Facebook page, I've posted several pictures in the past, and I'm going to continue to do so. And it's a spot that I call the Swamp Gut Travel Corridor. Basically what this is it's just a little natural valley or gut that kind of, it's like a little small ravine. It's not really a ravine, it's just a little small impression in the ground. And that gut travels from a higher ridge all the way down to the swamp bottom. And that gut was just literally full of head-tall berry briars. But I noticed that the deer were traveling through there. In fact, the first deer I ever jumped on my property, the first day I ever stepped foot on it, going in there to look it over before I bought it, I actually jumped a deer in that corridor. So, but what I've done since buying the property is I've gone in there with my weed trimmer, and I have literally cleared about a 10-foot wide path right down through that gut, right down through those briars. And I went in there a few weeks later and I sprayed it with Roundup so that no other briars can come up through there. And I capture pictures of deer now pretty much on a daily basis, traveling up and down that corridor from the swamp to the higher ridge. And the deer are just naturally going to take the path of least resistance. And when you have a 10-foot wide trail mowed right down to the grass and that all sprayed where it's just like a highway, when you have that trail, as opposed to the deer having to walk through literally 6-foot tall berry briars, they are going to travel through that trail. And I capture trail camera images of deer traveling through that gut corridor pretty much on an everyday basis. I really can't think of a day goes by that I don't get a trail camera picture of a deer traveling on that corridor. So creating these travel corridors through thick cover, if it's already kind of a natural travel, if it's already a natural travel corridor, and if it has a lot of cover in there, if you'll go through there and just kind of weed whack a little narrow trail, you will be amazed at how you can encourage deer to travel right down that corridor. So that's another great way, in my opinion, to increase the deer flow through your property and help them and really encourage them to take them travel corridors. Okay guys, and to follow up on the corridors, I just wanted to kind of mention something that I do on my property. And I don't do this at every stand, but I could, some of my stands are, right off food plot edges or right off the edges of these clover lanes, so I don't really have to do this to some of them. But in my trail, in my stands that are in a little bit harder place to get to, what I will do is I will go in there with my weed trimmer, and I will actually trim just a little 2-foot wide path, or maybe even just a little foot wide path. I'll just trim a little narrow corridor that gets me into that tree stand without having to bust through briars and brush through all these tree limbs and stuff and leave all that scent from these high grasses brushing up against your legs and your arms and all that. So I'll go in there with my weed trimmer and I'll trim just a little 1 to 2 foot wide path just so I can walk in there, and then I'll spray it with Roundup. And that does a great job of just keeping all that high grass down, and it allows you to access these more remote tree stand locations without having to make as much noise and without having to leave anywhere near as much scent. And it can also help you get out of your tree stand at dark without having to spook deer that might be in that nearby food plot or in that nearby travel corridor. You can slip out of that tree stand and be a lot more discreet if you have a little narrow footpath that's removed of all vegetation and dead leaves and all that. I find this to be another great way to increase the huntability of your tree stands, especially if you're going to hunt this spot several times throughout the year. You want to make that tree stand as easy and as quiet to access as possible. So that's another thing that I really think can, it doesn't necessarily so much attract daylight activity, but it can help you keep deer on your property, or keep them coming to a specific area during daylight if you're not bumping them constantly, getting in and out of those tree stand locations. So that's another important thing that I wanted to include here for this podcast. Okay, guys, and now the last thing I'm going to mention on this is, and again, it's a way that I think it's a way that I think has helped me increase generalized deer activity, especially daylight activity on my property, is I simply don't do any other recreational things on my hunting properties other than hunt and my food plot work. So what I mean by that is I'm not up there, racing around my four-wheeler. I'm not up there taking nature walks. I'm not up there, just doing anything else recreational related other than hunting and my food plots. Other than that, that's the only human activity I want on my property. I don't want to be in there with my four-wheeler, or in there doing a nature walk or walking the dogs or anything else you might want to do during the summertime. I know it's always fun to do these things on your property, but if you're trying to set this property up for hunting situations and and have that become a good hunting property, in my opinion, it's very important that you eliminate all other human activities on the property, because it's only going to be a detriment to how many deer are going to feel comfortable traveling through that property during the daytime, or even any time of day, honestly. If you have a whole bunch of, human activity on a property, it's going to limit any deer activity, especially daytime activity. So I think it's something that you don't often hear about, but certainly if you're going to have a property for hunting, you'll want to refrain from any other human activity on that property. At least that's my opinion on the matter. So there you have it, guys. Just a quick podcast on some things that I do on my hunting properties that I think help me not only increase general deer activity on the property, but certainly help me encourage daylight activity on my hunting properties. And I've only got one last reminder for everybody. If you enjoy the podcast, if you enjoy what we're doing here, I would really appreciate it if you could go on over to iTunes, leave us a quick review. It's a great way for me to not only help get this podcast to more people, but it's also going to be a great way to help me get future guest interviews here on the show. And as always, I want to thank everybody who took the time to tune into this week's show. I'm going to see you next week right here on an all-new episode of The Tradcast.